I grew up in Iceland, and that is an island in the North Atlantic on the Arctic Circle, and it has a lot of glaciers. You know, I've lived in North America now for a long time, and so I go back every couple of years, every year, and I'm definitely seeing some of the glaciers are getting smaller because of global warming, because the climate is changing. And there is one glacier in Iceland that actually got sort of officially, it lost its status as a glacier, like it had receded enough that it like no longer counted geologically as a glacier.
Oh, wow.
You know, and there are many other glaciers that are kind of like headed towards that eventually. So the text of the piece is a list of just glacier names in Iceland, including the one that is no longer a glacier. In some parts of the piece, you hear the text more clearly, and in other parts, it's like more obscured. Actually, the trajectory of the text is that at the beginning, it's sort of clearly declaimed and really like clearly announced, and then by the end, the kind of it's almost like the text is melting, and that like the very end of the piece, you only hear the vowel sounds of the words, and you don't hear any of the consonants and the more like hard shapes. So it is a sort of like a disappearing.
So we have here, we're just chatting a little bit here, but we have here Fjóla Evans, and she's a fifth year at Columbia, which is, we've had people come in from Columbia. This is not the Columbia Composers podcast or whatever like that, but I want to have as many of them in because it's just fun to talk to, and everybody writes so differently. And you're entering into your fifth year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And originally from Canada. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Did you go to school in Canada, like your master's? I don't remember what your trajectory was into Columbia. Was it the McGill, Columbia, or was it something else?
Well, I did go to McGill. I went to McGill for cello performance, and that was a long time ago. And then after that, I spent a couple of years just like living in Montreal, freelancing, working in cafes and stuff.
So you still play cello now?
Not so much. I do play for sure, and I'd like to be. I think one of the things I want to do this fifth year is like the dissertation year at Columbia, where we have a little bit more time to like delve deeper into like the artistic pursuits. Mm-hmm. I've been doing that the whole time in the degree, but there's like I don't have to take any courses or teach this year, so I'd like to get kind of more back into playing more.
What do you think about that? Because like I'm not a composer performer at all. I'm like the furthest away from that. I can't imagine like practicing and then composing and like doing those two things all the time. But that used to be like what everybody else did. Like before
Mozart or whatever?
Yeah, like Mozart, Beethoven, Liszt, all you can name, keep going down the list, Chopin, I mean, all of them did that. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, in the 1900s until now, it's composers and performers, and the silo is so extreme. But I've been seeing more and more people recently, like I would say last 5-10 years, that can play and also compose just as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like for you, is that something that you can see yourself keeping up?
Now, quick pit stop to let you know that I do offer one-on-one consultations and lessons in regards to anything composition related. This can range for helping you put together your portfolio for any composition degree that you're applying to, or you might want to improve your creative chops as a composer from week to week or month to month. Or you might want to get a better handle of the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a composer. How do you sell your sheet music? How do you negotiate commission rates? How do you apply to contests? How do you apply to grants? How do you do anything as a composer, let alone just writing the music? So if this is you, you can contact me using the link down in the description below.
Yeah, I guess it's been something that has been, I feel a bit maybe, like I guess at different times I feel like the cello playing has been a bigger part of my life, and at different times composing has been a bigger part of my life. I guess recently with the Columbia degree, like I feel like I've definitely been just more occupied with composing. Yeah. So it's been harder to find more time to play. But I do find that they're connected for me. Like I've written a lot of pieces for myself to play on cello, and I've like a bunch of pieces that I've made that are like based on, recordings that I'll like improvise some recordings and like layer them and edit them. And like I do think that sort of practice bleeds into the composed music where I'm like not playing on the cello when I'm composing. I think it's just like some ideas and types.
So when you're composing, you don't play on the cello. You don't have it like by you or anything like that.
Not unless I'm writing for cello specifically, or I'm doing these like pieces with the multi-track cello pieces. Those are If I'm like writing a large ensemble piece, I typically don't work at the cello.
So do you have like a keyboard or something that you have by you, or do you use anything to figure out what the pitches are and all that kind of stuff?
I'll use a keyboard sometimes at the beginning to figure out some pitch material, but I'm also not a very good pianist.
Yeah.
So like it's that the piano playing, the keyboard playing is sort of limited to kind of like some harmonies or sonorities.
So when you're writing, like, just to jump right into it, because
Sure.
I'm very curious, because I saw on Instagram recently you were with the Toronto Symphony, right?
Yeah, I just
So
had
when
a
you're-
piece at the Toronto Symphony this last weekend.
Yeah, like a short kind of 5 minutes or so piece, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like when you're writing a piece like that, are you using the cello at all, like when you're writing, or since it's for orchestra, it's kind of like it's not for cello, it's for something else when you're writing a piece like that?
Yeah, I didn't really compose that at the cello. Although I'll say for that piece, kind of one of the first musical ideas that came to me that ended up being in the final piece was this sort of low string line, this line between the violas, basses, and the cellos, which I think is like that type of line I think is very influenced by like just my background as a player, I think, just like was a very kind of idiomatic line for the low strings.
Yeah. No, I was really curious to hear that piece and put it on the show, but I think it was too quick between last week and this week, and there's probably some union stuff.
I think I'm supposed to have had it, received it already, but I didn't receive it. That was on my to-do list today, was to write them and follow.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we could put it online, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I was just very curious because it was so recent, you know, because I like to have the most recent stuff as possible just to see what you're up to now. But we could hear some stuff that you composed in the last couple of years. The first piece that I want to share is the piece called Paris, Texas. That's a really crazy title when I first looked at it. What the heck does that mean, Paris, Texas? But it's for I think it's for, what is it, the pedal steel guitar and an assortment of percussion. So we're going to play the first 2 minutes right now. So I mean, like with this piece, just so everybody knows, because I don't have the program notes anywhere in the video, like what is the piece about and how did you come up with having all these crazy sounds? It don't seem like you wouldn't think that they would go together, but for whatever reason they go together in this piece. So how did that all happen?
So the piece is called Paris, Texas, and it sort of is like I started working on it in 2019, which is like when I was about to move back to New York to start this program at Columbia. And I think I was sort of thinking about like living in the United States again and sort of like this is a little bit of like a I don't know, I nod to like a little bit of like dipping my toe into like a more American culture maybe. So just like the choice of the instrument, of the pedal steel instrument, definitely like is, I think, in some ways a very American sound. The piece came to be because it's friends of mine have this group called Party of One. It's Liz Four is the guitarist. She plays a lot of new music, but also plays a lot on Broadway. And then Jess Sang is a percussionist who's busy in all kinds of different music contexts. She does a lot of new music as well. So definitely the piece owes a lot to like the collaboration with them, and particularly with like the pedal steel. It's sort of a foreign instrument to me. Like I had to figure out like what chords are playable and like which notes can you do the glissandi, the slides on, and just kind of like I was able to work a lot with her, just kind of like fine tuning the pedal steel part. And then definitely with Jess, we met a bunch of times, a few times at least, and a lot of the strange sounds are definitely like indebted to her practice as a percussionist, and like she kind of like showed me all these different things that she loves doing, and I kind of like picked a few to kind of feature in that piece. So that's how we got this Waldteufel, the kind of instrument that has this like croaking sound.
Yeah, I had to look that up. I had no idea what it was.
That was something she introduced, and I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
and
it works really well too.
I also wanted something that had some pitch element, but that it was a little bit in between pitched and unpitched. So that's kind of how we settled on like the tile as so she's playing like I'm not sure how many, 4 or 5 different pieces of tile that have different pitches. So just to have kind of like a slight melodic range within them, but they're still having this more sort of percussive sound as well.
With the tiles, was it your intention to have like certain microtonal pitches, or was it like, okay, here are the 5 tiles and this is kind of what they sound like? Like, because they're all sort of a variation on E flat, I feel like. So was that something intentional? You wanted those to be, microtonal shadings, or was it like, okay, these are the 5 tiles I have to work with. Okay, let's make a piece out of them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted this sort of kind of microtonal shading. So like I know like so far this has only been performed by Jess and Liz, but if, in future, I imagine that other people could play this, and I guess I would direct them to kind of try to find the tiles that are like of similar pitch but not the exact same pitch, and then I would kind of ask them to just like rank them in range from like high to low, and just sort of like read the music according to that. So just kind of keep a tight range, so it becomes more like this sort of like a variation on a similar pitch rather than like a big melodic jump. Yeah.
No, it's an interesting way to approach microtonality, because you're not so specific about what you want. As long as it's in that E flat range, so it's kind of in tune with the
it's not
like
a particular scent tuning that is
you're not
required.
looking for some overtone series or anything. It's just like, okay, there's a little bit of an off kilter kind of sound.
And a little bit like you are going slightly up and slightly down. So like a little bit of exactly. A little bit of direction in the contour. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, like with microtonality, it's like everybody has such a personal way of tackling it. Like, I feel like I used to be more like, I don't really care, kind of whatever goes. Somewhere between C and C sharp, that's the note.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm like, oh my God, I need to have the C sharp up 21 cents or whatever for this to work.
Oh, how do you do that? Like, how do you get that specific?
Just like whatever partial, like if I'm high up the series, if I'm really high, like a 25th partial or 27th partial or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
I would just choose the partial and then kind of learn to hear that pitch on the keyboard. Like I would just have it and like, okay, I like that one. I don't like the 25th partial, I like this partial better. And just kind of experimenting with which partial combinations I like the most.
How do you hear it on the keyboard?
Oh, with the Piano Tech software.
Oh, okay.
So you just put how many cents higher or lower you want, and it just does it,
Cool.
But then you got to figure out, okay, what's the overtone series on A flat, and you got to have to just kind of have like I usually have a chart next to me and just transpose from C and hope for the best and hope I didn't make a mistake.
Depending on the instrument.
Yeah.
That's cool. Why do you think it got more specific, that you initially felt less specific about it, and now you feel like you need the really particular?
I think it's because I'm finding I like to change key a lot, and I like to have many keys on top of each other. So for me to maintain some sort of consistency, I feel like I have to also decide what partials I'm using in each of those key areas. So and then then it's hard to say, okay, I'm just going to be C quarter tone up or D half flat. It becomes difficult for me to stay on those notes. But it changes every piece. Like I wonder, I mean, for you, it probably changes from piece to piece too. If you're using microtones, it's not always going to be like, okay, I'm going to pick these 5 notes right next to each other and they're kind of random, but they fit. I mean, I'm sure it changes. It sounds like it would change based on just that piece alone. It's not going to be that way every time.
Right.
But the other thing I noticed about this piece too is that, I feel like the more degrees we get, the more complex the music gets, especially on paper.
Okay.
But your music is not like that. It's pretty like consistently that, right? Am I wrong in this? I've heard enough of your pieces where I feel like this is a thing that you do or that you don't do, I guess. Like you are going for like the most direct way you can get the sound out without having to complicate it with extra shadings of rhythm or density. Like density doesn't seem like a thing for you as much as like being direct with the sounds being intentional with the sounds that you like that are very personal, and then just going for it instead of like kind of hiding them and then revealing them later. At least that's the impression I get. I could be wrong.
So you're wondering why I'm doing that, or
is it something that you noticed yourself, or is it something that it's the first time you hear it that I'm saying
Oh, okay.
I'm assuming that you noticed that.
Right. But no, I guess I appreciate what you said about the intentionality of the sound, because I think that's really true, that I spent a lot of time maybe like kind of at the outset trying to figure out like what the world of the piece is going to be like, and like what kinds of things are going to be part of it, and like how those particular sounds are going to evolve or not evolve. I think that it took me a while to like realize that was part of what I was doing when I was composing, was a sort of like this kind of initial, figuring out of like, what is the vibe really,
Yeah.
And like, I think that would sometimes frustrate me, because I would feel like I'd spend so much time like not writing pitches and like not having that much to show. And then I would sort of typically then the kind of actual notating and like putting everything down on paper would come sort of more fast. Once that was like established, the kind of sound world and the types of textures and kind of arc that I wanted to express. I don't know about complexity. I mean, I guess I can just talk about the music that I'm really drawn to. I think is really direct and often is sort of like somewhat clear in what it's trying to state. And I think I'm often very moved by music like that is sort of just has some kind of like structural integrity or sonic integrity that is just like so considered and so specific that like it almost leads the whole piece forward, that you don't need to necessarily complicate it with a lot of filigree or density. But that's, not to say that I'm against density. I mean, there are a lot of, like density I think can exist in many ways. Like I think Eliane Radique's music is really dense in a lot of ways. It's like kind of a wall of sound, but it also is this really direct, slowly evolving kind of, timbre.
I think that most people have this idea that if you're getting a DMA, a PhD, whatever, in music composition, your music is going to sound a certain way, right?
Okay.
Like in general, not you specifically, but in general.
A certain way, like in a particular style?
Aesthetics, maybe like you need to have a certain amount of knowledge to get the music, that kind of thing too. But I feel like
you're saying that there's an expectation that a composer in a doctoral program is making music that you need a doctorate to understand.
Yeah, which I think is ridiculous.
Okay.
But
yeah,
I think that people in general have this kind of expectation or just maybe not expectation, but assumption. I mean, I know this firsthand because I show my music to my parents or whoever, my brothers or people that are not, musically inclined in that way. I mean, in terms of the tradition or they
haven't studied music.
Or they haven't studied music and they're like, what the hell is this?
Okay.
to me it sounds very personal and direct and all and whatever.
Yeah.
But to anyone that's not studying music, it's like, what is this? Is this even music? Like, why do you even do this?
That's the reaction you get to your music? That's a...
Oh yeah,
wow.
yeah. But so I mean, it depends on perception. Like to me, your music is very direct, and it's very personal. Like I'm in the sound world, and then I'm dumped there, and then another piece, I'm in another sound world. Like with your piece for choir that we're about to listen to soon, I feel like I'm in another completely different sound world. I almost don't even know that it was the same composer that did it, except for the fact that you have a very specific space that you live in. And it also has that same kind of directness to it, where you're presented with an idea that you can really follow along through the whole piece. So let's listen to actually a couple of minutes of that. How do you pronounce it? Because I'm going to freaking screw it up again. I don't want to screw it up. So you say.
The piece is called Jöklaklukka. Jöklaklukka.
Which is like Icelandic, right?
It's Icelandic for glacial clock, which is also a type of flower.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's... Yeah, Jöklaklukka.
Let's hear it. So this part that I played here, this is not the beginning. This is like 4 minutes into the piece. And if you want to hear the whole thing, I'll have it down in the description below, just like the Paris, Texas piece and everything else that we do here. But I wonder here, this is like, first of all, it's completely in Icelandic, right? The text and all of that. So how did that come about, and how difficult was it to have the singers do this? Because to me, I'm looking at, I can't even pronounce the title.
Yeah, so this piece I wrote for a program called Pivot, which is sort of a Canadian program where composers kind of get a chance to usually like work a little bit outside of what their background has been. So like for me, I'd never written a piece for choir before. So when this opportunity was advertised, I applied because I was excited at the chance to like get to write for choir.
Wow.
And then I worked with like a mentor composer, Julia Palmer, who's originally from New Zealand, but is based in Toronto, on this piece. And this was kind of a project that like started before the pandemic, and then like I was writing it in the kind of early days of 2020. And as you can see in the video, the performers are wearing masks. So it was performed, I think, in 2021, but still kind of during more restricted times. Yeah, so the theme of the concert was like kind of man's relationship to nature, kind of in the Anthropocene, and kind of, man's abuse of nature. I don't remember the exact language, but it was sort of about like this complicated relationship that we as humans have to our surroundings.
All the pieces on this concert were commissioned?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They all had to deal with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So for the idea I had was about, so I grew up in Iceland, and that is, an island in the North Atlantic on the Arctic Circle, and it has a lot of glaciers. You know, I've lived in North America now for a long time, and so I go back every couple of years, every year, and I'm definitely seeing some of the glaciers are getting smaller because of global warming, because the climate is changing. And there is one glacier in Iceland that actually got sort of officially it lost its status as a glacier, like it had receded enough that it like no longer counted geologically as a glacier.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, and there are many other glaciers that are kind of like headed towards that eventually. And basically, so the piece, the text of the piece is a list of just glacier names in Iceland, and including the one that is no longer a glacier. And I just kind of, in some parts of the piece you hear the text more clearly, and in other parts it's like more obscured. Actually, the trajectory of the text is that at the beginning it's sort of clearly declaimed and really like clearly announced, and then by the end the kind of it's almost like the text is melting, and that like the very end of the piece you only hear the vowel sounds of the words, and you don't hear any of the consonants and the more like hard shapes. So it is a sort of like a disappearing of the
literally melting
part
at the end. Okay, that makes sense. Wow. And it kind of reminds me, I think, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think it's true. The John Adams piece on the transmigration of souls. Do you know that piece?
I've heard of it, but I don't know it.
It's like a 9/11 memorial piece, and this kind of reminds me of that. And the sound is completely different, but like I think he says the names of all the victims, or many of the victims. I think that's true in the piece, and that reminded me of Europe because you say the names of the glaciers,
right?
And, I mean, they're victims in a way,
right?
So it has that kind of eerie, very, very eerie sentiment, just in the context, but let alone the music itself, which also has that kind of vibe too.
Right.
To me, at least, when I hear like this very contrapuntal section, you figure out a way to make each line sound kind of like a glacier, and it's, I don't know if this is intentional enough. But like,
what do you mean?
Because you kind of sit on a line, you know, and then you do this like glissando. You do like a glissando. So like, let's say you have like a dotted half note, right? And then you have like a quarter note that goes to another note. That like quarter note right there is treated differently across different sections of the choir. So like one person is doing like a glissando on the second eighth note. One is doing that quarter note in triplets, but they're all leading to the same next note. So it's almost like if you have two glaciers or something like really close to each other, and they're like kind of pivoting or sinking below the other. It feels like, you know, there's all this snow or whatever ice on it that are moving at different rates, but they're all moving to the same direction. They're all sinking, or they're all moving up, things like that. And to me, the music was doing that.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if that was, again, like your other piece, the Paris, Texas piece, there are things like that you get like a very visceral reaction to that sound like the tiles, like you see the tiles, you know, when you play on those notes, you see that kind of frog kind of sound when you hear that background percussion instrument. Like, it's very visceral. And this piece has the same kind of qualities, even though it's about a completely different subject. So that's what I meant by, you know, it's a completely different piece, almost like by a different composer, but not really, because you're still doing those same very visceral things in both pieces.
Okay, thanks, I guess.
But I guess, I don't know if I'm just bullshitting here.
I mean, I'm very just sort of on that, what you were describing in the details about the triplets and I mean, I it's definitely something I am interested in, is like how can you sort of both like honor the individuality of the lines and the sort of like, you know, and like the kind of individual performers, and like still have them be moving together in a way, like they're sort of like all doing the same like big arc, but maybe like the smaller journey of how they get there is like slightly different. I think that's sort of is musically something I like playing with for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has to do with non-Western cultures too. That idea of heterophony, and the idea of like everybody is kind of playing the same thing but not really. Right. Like you do that a lot in this piece. And I mean, in a way, that's kind of the whole thing with the glaciers too. I mean, you're kind of describing I mean, it's not another culture, it's an inanimate thing, but
Right.
in a way you're describing what another, non-human thing or system of things are doing with music. So I thought that was, interesting to take on within a choir setting. And the fact that this is the first time you wrote for choir, it surprised me too. I thought, hearing this piece, I thought you wrote for choirs a bunch of times.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I've written for voice a bit, but not this many voices, and not this, in the context of knowing that there'd be several singers per part and stuff like that. So I don't think I think this maybe wasn't, I can't remember how many singers per part it was in the performance.
Yeah, but it looked like there were maybe 16 singers or something total. I don't know
Oh,
exactly,
okay.
but it was,
Yeah.
right, it was not a small group,
Right.
but it was not a huge 50-person group either. It was kind of
Right.
in that sweet spot between like a 4-person, very intimate, choir versus a huge 50-person, like,
Yeah.
that you find in college or something type of choir.
Right.
But I feel like this would work in both contexts because of what you were saying, that each one has kind of an individuality, but when you add them all up, actually, you still kind of get that same individuality, but it's just a little bit, it has that broader context to it. But, when you hear it a second time by a different choir, I guess when you really know
Right. Yeah.
how
yeah.
those ideas manifest, right?
Well, I could relate it. So one thing that was like, because you were asking me before about like my background as a cellist, and like something I did in this piece, which I was sort of new for me, is that this was an example of like an ensemble piece where I did kind of write it by recording it first. So I like recorded myself singing. I'm not a very good singer, but I did kind of, in a DAW, in Logic, recorded myself and like layered my singing and kind of like chopped it up and moved things around. And that's kind of like how I built the form of the piece. And so it kind of has more like, I think I got more into like some specifics of like tone and like, how do you hit a consonant, or like, do you hit it like head on or like more gradually, or like these kind of like really detailed sounds that I like don't know that I would have considered if I wasn't actually trying to like sing it myself as well. So I think that sort of was a interesting process for me anyway.
Yeah, and you include like very specific expressive markings there too. You don't say dolce or espressivo or things like that. You say like, I can't remember, one of them was like singing into a field or something like this, right?
Yeah, this
was like this.
This is
it's like, what the heck does that mean?
Indebted to Juliet Palmer. So because we'd have all these Zoom sessions and chat about like some ideas I had, and when I was telling her about this idea of glaciers, and I had this idea of like being outdoors, and like how can you kind of have this like scope of like vastness in a ensemble piece like this, and she showed me this style of singing from. Now I have to apologize. I think it's Swedish. It's like Northern European. It's called kulning, and it's like this cattle cry that like herders of cattle would traditionally sing, and they like really, it's like very piercing, and they really like belt it. It's like very projected, and like that was something I was like listening to and checking out when I was writing this piece. That was something I was trying to get at with that directive, sort of just like, imagining that you're really like singing like across a field, like across a very vast distance, and like how, would you project your voice, and like what tone would you use in that kind of a context?
Yeah, I mean, and the piece starts off that way too. The piece starts in the very beginning like that, and it grabs you immediately. I didn't realize that's where it came from.
Yeah.
But then you put the glacier topic on it, and it switches in your mind what that sound is attributed to. So it's interesting when you start thinking about extra musical things. Like you think it's one thing, but it actually was from something else.
Well, you thought it was? What did you think it was?
Like I just thought, I only thought about the glacier like moving, like how I was saying before, it moves like that, and some parts of it move this way, some parts move that way. But then you're saying, oh no, it's actually from that kind of sound is from the cattle herders instead.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that totally changes everything. Yeah. But that's why I like to have people on this thing, because the program note says one thing, right? I mean, it's very formal and all this stuff, and you try to be as concise as you can with what the piece is about, right? Because you're putting in a little booklet, and people are reading it while they're listening to the piece. But it's from the composer himself or herself, it's just a completely different context. I feel like you have more time to talk about why you did certain things. And I think that's why this format is almost even more, a little bit more interesting, than just reading the note or reading your bio or more whatever on your on your website. So that's kind of why I do this, to discover things like that I would never have known. And listen to a piece like that it would have came from that sort of tradition. Yeah. So you're going into a dissertation year, and then after that you have a 6th year, right? At Columbia.
Yep.
What do you think about the States in general, studying here, having your music played in New York? Does it feel like you want to see yourself staying here and building out your path here, or would you prefer to go back to Canada and to go back to what you were doing before, or I guess the connections that you had there before, or I guess the connections you still have? And because there's so many people from Canada that are in New York,
right? But
most of them, I feel like, they want to stay in the U.S. Is that true? Or what's that relationship like between like Canadian composers and New York, or more broadly, I guess, American composers?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the composer and the particular person and like their trajectory and interests. And I came to New York for first time 10 years ago. So I did my master's at NYU with Julia Wolfe. So that was kind of when I first started. Like, I had composed a little bit when I was at McGill, but I really kind of got deeper into it when I moved to New York. So I feel like a lot of my early collaborations as a composer were here. And so this is kind of the place where I have the most kind of long-standing collaborations are with people in the New York worlds. So I guess in a way I feel like my compositional identity is a little bit indebted to the city. Like when I think about Montreal or Toronto, I do, like I've been there, like, in compositional context, but that a lot of my early sort of positioning as a musician was as a cellist, so that's is some time ago now. So I definitely don't, I really love living in New York, and it's a place that's been very inspiring to me, and I have been loving like getting to know my colleagues at Columbia and just like getting to know the city like in a different context. But so I feel like there's like a lot here for sure, but it's hard to know, what my life will be like in 2 years. There's a lot of great things happening in Canada too. Lots of interesting venues in Toronto, in Montreal. I don't know the scene in like Vancouver as well, but just because I've never lived
it's on the
there.
other side.
Yeah, it's on the other side of the country, I don't know. I know that there was for an era where a lot of composers from McGill were coming to Columbia, but that I feel like I was a bit after that, like when it was like Zasha Tukastri, Matthew Ricketts, Alec Hall, Taylor Brook, Ashkan Bazadi. There was like a whole gang, and Nina Young.
That's why I'm wondering, because it seems like that seems to be the feeder,
Right.
McGill or Canada more broadly, a lot of great composers coming from there into Columbia or New York more broadly. It seems like the country that has the most export into like the American new music scene, or whatever you want to call it. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I'm grateful also just to
be a composer, is that you can kind of, have collaborators in different places that you're like, and like you said, you're collaborating with people from New Jersey. Like you're like sort of in New York, but not physically always in Manhattan, right? So it's like,
well, I wouldn't say I'm collaborating with people from New Jersey. But I mean, because I just moved out here, so I don't really know anybody out here. But
sorry, I meant like from New Jersey, you're collaborating with people all over the place. Is what I meant.
Oh, that's what I meant. Like,
I'm just saying,
the
geographical space that you are physically located is less important than if you were like a bassoonist. You'd have to be at rehearsals in person. You know what I mean?
I mean, I just think that composers nowadays, I mean, yes, there's a lot of challenges, right? Obviously. And I think work is one of the biggest things, especially if you want to be a professor. It's in a lot of ways it's limiting, but at the same time, creatively speaking, I can't think of a better time than now in terms of like the amount of voices that are allowed is a strange word to use, but I use that word a lot because before there weren't as many voices that were allowed to be in the concert hall, whether it was intentional or not. Right.
It's true.
It's just is.
People were excluded. I think you can say that.
Yeah. Well, not just in terms of diversity. I think in terms of ethnic diversity, that's very important. But
Certainly.
also in terms of aesthetics as well.
That's true too. Yeah.
I feel like at least we came up at that period where things really started to open up, and it almost feels like anything could be music. And that also presents its challenges too.
Right.
Because sometimes I get comments on this channel where it's like, okay, this person doesn't know how to do this or doesn't know how to do that. But it's like, well, they don't want to do that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think people just have to kind of accept that. But then it makes people that are interested in our field like, okay, where do I start? If everything is open,
right?
How do I know what I like? If they have even some sort of interest in what we're doing, how do they even know where to start? So that's something I've been thinking about, just like in my own mind, I guess. Like, where would somebody start, if they knew that they were interested, they heard something, maybe they went to the New York Phil or whatever that was new, but they want, where the heck did all this come from? I heard the Brahms, but then I heard this thing by Julia Wolfe.
Right.
How did she get all these ideas? Like, where is the trajectory between Brahms and what she does?
Right.
And unless the answer is like just going to school or opening up a book, or is there an answer that's not that's more like personal to their discovery of what music to them is? I don't know. I'm just spewing a bunch of bullshit at this point.
No, it's interesting to think about. I guess I can make the connection, but it maybe isn't so obvious. Or like, I mean, I don't know. I guess kind of goes back to the question of like, what is this kind of music, new music or contemporary music, contemporary classical music. I mean, in the case of your example, I mean, both composers are writing for the symphony orchestra. I think that's like, the actual medium of the instrumentation and the context of it, like that it is at Lincoln Center in this kind of concert hall situation. That's a starting point at least. But, yeah.
Well, I mean, you studied with Julia Wolfe too, so you would know some of her influences and things like that, and how she's related to the orchestra in and of itself. Because a lot of us composers, I mean, like you had the opportunity to work with Toronto Symphony. I'm writing a piece now for the LA Phil.
Oh, that's great.
So we have,
congrats.
Thank you. But we are working in the orchestra land. Why are we still doing that? Sometimes I struggle with figuring out like why I'm still writing for orchestra. But then the moment when I hear the piece for the first time, is I remember why I'm doing this.
What's that feeling?
I know it sounds like very superficial, but it's just a lot of sound. Like
it's acoustic.
Acoustic sound.
It's really cool.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Like we're so used to hearing loud sounds, right? But it's all stuff that's coming out of speakers, unless it's like a train horn or a car horn or something like that.
Subway screeching.
Yeah, but a loud sound that you created that's coming out of all these different instruments. I mean, there's nothing that compares to that. So besides all the institutional baggage that it has, the glacial pace of programming and figuring out how to get a commission going. I mean, it takes years with the orchestras, but it's always worth it. And every time I finish, I'm like, God, I can't believe I did that, but let's do it again. I don't know. You've written a few orchestra pieces, right? I mean, you did this one for Toronto. You did the one with the Chicago Composers Orchestra too, right?
Yeah, it was sort of more a chamber orchestra piece.
A little bit smaller, but still a lot of players. I mean, do you have that, like, what's your relationship like to that? I mean, is it similar to mine, or is there a different reason for?
Oh, like why I do it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think when I first started composing, I was kind of like, so I was at NYU with Julia Wolfe, and I was sort of like, a lot of my kind of composers I look up to are like, her and the kind of bang on a can universe people like Michael Gordon, David Lang, and then above them, and in the teacher role to them, like Steve Reich, and like he kind of talks publicly, I believe, about like not wanting to write for orchestra and kind of like the pain, like not being interested in that world and kind of like sort of disowning it a little bit. And I think so when I first started composing, I was like, oh yeah, orchestra sounds it's so institutional, it's so hard to like do anything creative with it. And then when I guess I got a chance to write a piece just for a reading session, so they just like rehearsed it like at school I just got so excited about the sounds, and just like it sort of feels like, I think if I had to like distill like what I'm most excited about in music, it usually is like the timbre or the quality of a sound, and like sort of being able to like morph that and shift it. And I feel like because there's so many instruments in the orchestra and there's such a range of types of sound, it like really is like the richest palette to like do that, like to just kind of morph and transform sound. And so like I just got really realized how kind of exciting that was, that like just I think that's for me is a motivating thing.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm the same way too, although sometimes I find myself getting lost in the process, and I'm like, oh my god, like it just becomes like more like a puzzle than like writing music sometimes, because like, oh my god, I'm keeping track of these staves until make sure the piccolo's breathed in this in this section, and then it kind of gets like almost like you're building something in a factory almost. You know, it could get kind of like that with orchestra, and then you kind of have to snap out of it and be like, no, remember there's a bunch of it's a human experience here, you know?
Right.
It's not, you don't have to be so anal about each staff and making sure. Sometimes you got to leave a little room for error, you know, in this kind of thing. And I feel like the older composers, I mean, the dead composers that everybody plays now had a little bit of that too. But a lot of the mistakes in the orchestration, things like that, I think got smoothed over time with conductors and things like that, and just different families of instruments. They know that Mahler piece, or they know that Tchaikovsky piece. They know, oh, he says mezzo forte there, but I really mean to play piano and stuff like that. I wonder how much of that is going on, because we have so much pressure when we get to the stand.
Yeah. At
that first, second rehearsal, right? Everything has to be perfect.
Right.
Notation, the blend, the dynamics, all that stuff. But I don't know. I don't think it was like, I have a very strong opinion that it wasn't always like this.
Oh, you think that there was more room for...
Yeah.
This is me balancing the different layers.
Yeah. I mean, how would they know? I mean, how would they know that this, like one flute against 10 violins sounds... How would they know what that sounds versus... you know, one flute and 5 violins? How would they know?
Right.
Unless they're around them constantly all the time. You know, with us, we have playback. We can figure out what certain things sound like, at least in time. But back then, when they didn't have computers or any of this stuff, or even access to going to the symphony hall all the time, how would they? So anyway, these are the kind of things that I was just wonder about. It makes me more excited to write more for the orchestra. I mean, that's my diatribe.
That. No, it's definitely, I mean, I guess ideally you can like play around with those things, but it's sort of hard to access, especially with a professional orchestra, the time to be able to kind of make those little changes and those shifts. Yeah. But,
so what's going on next for you? So you're doing this show here, this little thing here, and then are you writing something right now, or do you have a show coming up?
Next, I'm going to Finland for this creative dialogue workshop that's like run by Anssi Kartunen, the cellist. I think he was a big collaborator with Sari Aho, who just passed away, sadly. There's probably a bit of a somber...
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting time, to say the least, to be in Finland.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm I don't know, a big fan of her work, and just, I don't know, it's quite sad.
Shocking.
Yeah. So I'll be there for 10 days, and I'm writing, I believe it's a piece for, I have to apologize, I don't remember the name, but it's like an Lithuanian zither, like a folk instrument that you like pluck or hit with little hammers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like a dulcimer sort of thing.
Yeah, but it's a particular Lithuanian, sorry, not Estonian.
I feel like every country has like their own version of that. Like in the Middle East, we have the kanun,
right?
You know, it's like that kind of thing. Yeah, or like in Japan, I think they have the koto, right? So it's like, so everyone seems to have all these instruments. Like they're kind of the same. Like the violin, they're kind of it's kind of ubiquitous.
Yeah, put a string over some wood.
And there you go. You have a sound.
Yeah, so I'm writing a piece for that, and viola, 2 violas and a cello, I think, is the
cool.
So it's sort of like string, bowed and plucked strings. So that I'll be working on that, and then there'll be a concert in Helsinki.
Cool.
Like and then July 8th.
July 8th, and then coming back to New York after that.
Cool.
Well, I'm really happy that you came by.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And check out Fjóla's music down in the description below. I have those 2 pieces, the Paris, Texas piece and the choral piece that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce about the
Jöklaklukka.
glaciers. There you go. And I'll see you next time.